You know, there's many pieces that are all coming together, but some of them are directly tied to, you know, either decisions of the board or priorities that the board has articulated.
Almost all of them actually, that I go through. I mean, Northridge, the whole Northridge thing that was a board decision.
Ninth grade sports, go to
Ninth
the
grade
high
sports, that was a fun night,
Yeah.
but that was another
All
one
I'm
of ours.
trying to say is that I kind of, it's sometimes hard to have these discussions, people's feelings get hurt, and, you know, we hear that people get offended, but that's not the nature. I'm just saying, like, we all keep saying we see this opportunity, this achievement gap, it's widening. And so I think the positive behavior, that was a really good point, the kindergarten, but I just think it's important that I'm understanding where that's going. The ESL, I see that.
Just to build up that real quick, the other thing that doesn't show up in something like this is to the extent we do things like with community and school, to the extent that the Woodinville, city of Woodinville gives us more money for hang time or something like that. So in some sense, there's these in-kind or other kind of gifts that can come through the district and the foundation. That work oftentimes, as we learn that looking for the progress and some of these other things, is really augmenting the budget, the board goals. And I think that realignment, I don't know when that happened with the foundation to say, please look at these. I know the PATAs, oftentimes, they're separate. They should choose how they spend their money. But I think there's a real attentiveness to using additional resources and additional partners. And when I go to the community schools, I'm going to be looking and asking that question of how can we get the other partners that are in our district, that are in our community, to provide assistance, especially for our achievement gap types of students. And those wouldn't show up here in this kind of a budget, but they are definitely, but from a annual reporting, kind of the good that we do, trying to keep track of that and capture some of the value add from those things that we've increased, I think it would be a valuable way to present our budget. Here's the money that the state gave us and what we did with it. Here's the other ways we're increasing the outcome, whether it's through volunteer
Yeah,
hours
because
or
I
whether
just
it's through
see
dollars.
it not going down, so.
Well,
But
in
maybe
some
with some of
places
these
it
new
is.
things, it will go, it'll
Well,
help impact it.
you know, I would counter with, I think the Frank Love visit was a really great example of it's going down. With the conversion of program, and I'm using my title dollars and my lab dollars and my district dollars.
Yeah,
I've got
great
this
data.
PD, and they had data that would suggest they've reduced it by half. So I think it is going down.
And I think as we go broader out in the community, when we talk about the budget that because there's a lot of people involved in that, here's the budget and here's the ways in which we've allocated and connected our resources
Yes.
and gotten these kinds of outcomes.
Absolutely.
And I think anytime we get the money to the mission and the mission being achieved, we need to tell
That's a
and
great
understand that story. Right. But putting that in part of the budget thing, I think would be really useful.
We're on the complicated part.
Alright.
So I'll try to make this simple. What we talked about, the revenue assumptions on an earlier sheet have been programmed for the next 3 years into these revenues, okay? These are revenues by type, and going across 3 years, the change is going across 3 years. So starting from the top, we are assuming basically an increase of $1 million a year in taxes, in levy. So that's programmed in. Local non-tax, the only significant one we're expecting is the loss of the full-day kindergarten tuition. Once it's gone, it's just forever gone. This amount lowers and then it stays lowered. We talked about some of these, we're getting less money for staff mix this year, but we're also going to be paying less. Increased enrollment, we have a tick up. K-3 for this year, there's an increase. Then walking across, you're going to see significant increases in state apportionment because of our 700 and 400 increases in enrollment. You saw that 3 million on the program list for class size. There'll be one more tail, we believe, in the second year, and then we don't know after that.
That has more to do with the fact that your kindergarten numbers are
Increase.
going up, and so that's like,
Yeah. Thank you. The 1,000, 1,000 versus the 1,080, the averages, we talked about that. So state funded full day kindergarten, there was 2 ways to do this. you've already seen the expenditures, the expenditures, the expenditures. So we netted revenues and left it on the expenditures to be consistent with everything you've been researching for months. So if you're wondering if it's quite the right offset, you'll see the true offset on the expenditure side because it was difficult to display. The estimated cost, or excuse me, the estimated funding for COLA. So Ken, you'll be able to see the estimated funding compared to the estimated cost for just the COLA. You saw that it was, 2.1 and 2.4 in ensuing years, so the amount keeps going up. I told you about the slight inflationary increase for the MSOCs, maybe about 400,000 for our 20,000 students. State special purpose, here's where I would address lab or state special ed or anything that I, anticipated, not anticipating any real change down. And again, if there's an increase, we put the increase against the program it's intended to fund.
So what is the decreased special ed enrollment?
We're down in our overall percentage of special needs kids.
Not that their needs are not, the ones that we had, we're getting the right kids that,
Yes.
and which have greater needs, so. We'll see how that holds, we'll see how it holds.
We're doing
Well, I always
better
get criticized because
meeting
it's going up,
kids'
so.
needs without necessarily having to qualify them for special education.
Yeah.
Right, and that's that part of how are we being proactive and
Yes.
meeting their
Right.
needs in a way so that they don't become an instructional deficit and have to go into the special ed. Right?
Again, a fine example of a decrease in state funding that may not be a bad thing. So,
I'm gonna knock on wood that this holds.
Okay, so transportation, remember transportation, their analysis of full funding is a whole year behind. So in 16-17, we're gonna get based on the results of 15-16. So we increased our transportation services this year with growth and moving more kids to other schools besides our neighborhood school. We believe that that will reach us the following year. The next two numbers are a function of the COLA flowing through the transportation program.
About a year behind.
A year behind, also. Same thing for the special ed increase. They have basic ed and special ed. And as the COLA flows through basic ed, it also flows through special ed. So there'll be a tick up in special ed.
And the reason you're seeing a larger tick up in special ed the first year, the 600,000, has to do with the increase in the K-3 class size. So that 3 million is a big part of that tick up for special ed.
Thank you. More flowing through. So I'll move on expenditures unless I know that was a broad, fast.
So do you kind of catch the math then, and each of the black numbers is a reflection of any of the blue underneath and the orange in the middle, and then it goes to the next black number?
It's a spreadsheet. I mean,
Yeah.
what person doesn't love, it's all in one page, the font you can read.
Would you like it by
Love that. No, it's
alphabetically or
revenue,
by
it's
age or
wonderful,
spreadsheet?
beautiful, love the spreadsheet.
There's pretty much no formulas behind them, it's just straight numbers.
So basically, we believe this year's revenue is around 231 million, increasing over 255 million in a few years.
And again, no levy cliff,
Yeah.
no 2017 grand bargain. So just kind of status quo.
Again, expenditures, well, when you hire more staff because of enrollment increases, you need to pay for those staff. So that is your first line, well, no, actually, I'm sorry, it's your second line. We do have, reduced our state apportionment by an estimated 800,000 for lower staff mix, but we think it's gonna cost us 1 million less, or a net of 200,000 to the good. So going again across the top, staff increases for enrollment growth, other staff increases, first year's ELL, second year ELL, as well as kindergarten's gonna be a little tight next year, even with the modified plan, and then we would like to ease it back up to, say, last year's levels. So that will increase staff again as all the kinders start coming through. Those MSOCs increase, including enrollment growth, are the programmed, like the Woodinville SRO contract and some of those that I did not italicize that are programmed into the budget. We have a large enrollment contingency, expenditures offset by revenues. We compare what we think we're getting in revenues compared to the additional staff that we needed to hire for that extra growth, and realize that we're probably about 160,000 to the good this year. It's hard to, if you get 10 kids, you might need half a teacher. You get 10 kids, they might be dispersed, that you don't hire a teacher. So for full-day kindergarten, here is that 214,000 you saw in the first year for new teachers. So what we're doing today is we have about 39 full-day kindergarten classrooms. We believe, but they're tuition funded. So we are paying their full salary, whole day. Next year, they're gonna be paid for by the state. So they're still full-day kindergarten teachers. They're gonna be full-day kindergarten teachers, but we have to pick up the try. The tuition was picking up the try. The state will not pick up the try. The second year, we're gonna take all the half-day programs and turn them into full-day programs, and that's adding a lot of teachers. Okay. So primary center, we believe we're gonna pay, and it's the 580s on the list you saw. We're gonna pay it in 16, 17, and then not pay it in 17, 18, so it goes away. Transportation mitigation.
But it'll probably be something else, right? that
Well, that'll be
cover
post,
that.
that'll be grade reconfiguration year, so in theory, everybody should be back in their neighborhood schools. We shouldn't have the demand for the primary center. It could be that there's some other mitigation that's necessary, but actually we should hopefully see a general decrease in mitigation because schools are gonna start being more right sized.
And it was only a
Not all
2-3-year
of them,
lease too, wasn't it?
I thought it was a 5-year lease.
4 with an option.
What happens to all those assistant principals at all these schools?
We'll find places for them to land, they'll be just fine, trust me.
Transportation mitigation, part of that includes the primary center, and so you see a reduction in the following year. We still believe that there's, we're adding a high school, there's gonna be more routes, we've got grade reconfiguration, there could be more or less routes. So right now, we're estimating that we still need to increase transportation, but just not to the primary center in that second year.
So again, a reminder, no placeholder in here for any transportation expenses associated with a later start.
Bargaining contract changes, that is current collective bargaining agreements that are settled. So we know next year, 400,000. The following year, there's very few groups that are that far out, so 120. You will note at the very bottom of the page, the estimated cost of 1% above COLA, state COLA, for the unsettled collective bargaining agreements. 1%, $1.25 million next year. Then as staff is growing significantly, more kindergarten teachers, growth, estimating 1.5 and 1.6. These are not in the expenditures. Okay?
And just, so I clarify, so 2% above
Right.
COLA would be
Double.
double.
Yep.
Got it.
Perfect.
So, I'll keep moving on and I'll say something about that. North Creek, the general operational costs of the high school. So you saw some of the costs for next year, we're estimating 390,000. Then obviously going into 17, 18, pick up the rest of the 2.6 million ongoing. North Creek, this looks odd, but what it's basically saying is that we are gonna spend the 2.5 million somewhere over the next 2 2.5 years.
Yeah, so we don't know that we're gonna spend 2 million next year. We don't know exactly how that 2.5 million is gonna spread itself out, but from a budget modeling standpoint, we've just put in that 2.5 million is somehow gonna be spent down over the next 3 years.
For, am I correct, for not just North Creek High School, but also
Great
for the
Creek.
reconfiguration?
Yep.
All the
Yep.
costs associated with.
So somewhere by here in 19, it will be consumed. It might ebb and flow, but it will be consumed over this time frame.
But basically, we've reflected it dollar in, dollar out from a budgeting standpoint.
Small amount for purchase services, like the 5,000 was the Center for Human Services, so that's already on your list. A small inflationary factor for utilities and insurance. Here's the cost of the COLA. So 2.7 versus 1.6 in state funding the first year. Second year, 1.95 versus an estimated 3.3. So you can calculate the magnitude of the local contribution to the cost of those COLAs.
Just keep in mind that it's not exactly a one-to-one, because your special ed and your transportation does bump up when you get the COLA.
Yeah, sorry. So expenditures, also increasing over time. So you'll see the remaining, so we have 1.5 million set aside for grade reconfiguration. You'll see the last two $500,000 assignments to fund balance, and then they'll be exhausted. You'll see base expenditures increase. Our assignment for minimum fund balance will increase proportionately to 3%. The decrease in assigned fund balance, we funded an extra $300,000 of curriculum. So our annual amount is usually $1 million. We funded $1.3 million, so that $300,000 will go away, and it will resume the $1 million allocation. We also had a LAP or ELL, sorry. Is it LAP or ELL carry forward?
It was LAP.
LAP carry forward that can only be carried forward and spent on LAP. So even though it's within our fund balance, it has to be expended on LAP, it has to be expended this year. So that will go away. So you'll see that without a levy cliff and without collective bargaining, we look in great shape.
And without start time.
And without start time. But if you put 2.5 million here, subtract it, and then you add another 2%, and if that's 5 million, you can see it starts. That's for a later discussion.
That's later discussion.
So this is with the levy cliff. So where our revenues had been 255, they go down to 249. You'll see, so the levy cliff takes effect in calendar year 2018. So 17-18 is a combination of fully funded 17, levy cliff 18, and then we've taken the first hit, and Chris put a nice chart together at the end that visualizes it a little bit better. Everything else is the same. All the numbers flow through the same that you saw in the first section. Again, the expenditures are all the same. But the impact of the levy cliff is we went from 10.7 million down to 147,000.
That's a lot.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
that's a chunk of change.
But
So-
that's without doing any cuts, doing any,
Correct.
Absolutely,
this
yeah.
is just
Yeah.
dollar for dollar,
Yeah,
looking at the two
exactly,
budgets.
exactly.
Right, but it means
We
no,
wouldn't slowly
no
go.
pay raise, no later
Right.
start time, and
Right, correct, and it's with
That's why
no,
they call it cliff.
I understand.
That's right. They were
Yes.
very.
We wouldn't allow ourselves to slowly bleed to death, but this is
And
the.
in terms of just the statewide impact is estimated to be about 500 million
500 million when you
across all
calculate,
this.
yeah, when you calculate the lost levy revenue and then the lost local effort assistance for those, we don't receive local effort
Right.
assistance, but for the property poor districts who do, the grand total is just under $500 million.
So-
So politically, I don't see in the age of McCleary any reasonable scenario in which the legislature would allow that to happen. In the political climate, do I see them playing brinksmanship with it? Unfortunately, that could be a reality.
And Ken and I we got this mantra down, but next, if they don't deal with it this session, next year, we have to look at those numbers.
Correct,
Because
because-
then it starts impacting us
Yes.
before they're done.
Because next year at this time, we'll be planning 17-18 budget, when the levy cliff would come into play, and they'll be in session this time next year. Well, we'll
the
run out
planning.
of time,
Right.
with the timing won't work, and that's the message we've been carrying, that we were all carrying to our legislators when we were in Olympia.
And you refresh my memory, is the ghost money and the levy cliff, they're different, correct?
Well, the
Are they
ghost money
tied?
is also part of the levy cliff,
Oh,
so here we go, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so yes, two things. Currently, we collect 28.9% of our levy base, our levy calculation. So you compile the numbers, which are basically state and some federal revenues, and take 28.9% of that amount, and that is what the calculation. They are proposing reducing that 28.9 back down to 24.9.
That's the ghost money.
No.
That's the
That's, this is a silly.
That's
The
4%. That's
4%.
the additional 4%.
so in 2010,
That's the levy.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2010.
they authorized us to collect an additional 4% in levy authority, and that is set to sunset in 2018 or expire in 2018, that extra 4%. Then the ghost money, what they did is, years ago, we got initiative 728, student achievement funds, and they took those funds away, but they said, we're not gonna double hit you, because you're basically, at the time, collecting about 25% in your levy base of those student achievement funds. So we don't want you to lose 9 million plus another 2.25 in your levy. So in your levy base, we will act as if they still exist. They're ghosted in your levy calculation. So that was one of them. And that was a good 9 million at the time that they took that funding source away from us. The second big ghost money is years ago, before this new K-3 class size reduction, they funded much improved class size ratios in grades K through 4. And then slowly they dwindled, and then they said, yes, we will let you include that in your levy base as if you're really receiving it from us, state of Washington, even though you're not. So in 2018, they said, no more 4%, no more pretending that you're really getting those revenues in your levy base. So those ghost revenues are about
Yeah. it's a
25 million
percentage,
right now,
percentage, you
ghosted?
get more money, so.
And you're looking at currently 28.9% of that amount that we can collect from our taxpayers. And then the second thing is that the 4% reduction. So they're both supposed to hit in 2018.
Why don't they just raise the levy base?
Because that's politically very challenging for them to do, because that's the heart of the McCleary case, is that because the legislature isn't appropriately funding basic education, districts have become overly reliant on their local levies, which by law are only supposed to be funding enhancements. They're not supposed to be funding, so if local levies do anything, they need to move in the opposite direction. I mean, to satisfy the McCleary ruling and the constitutional requirement. So it's very difficult for legislators to just keep ratcheting the local levies up and basically shifting the burden of funding more and more to local communities.
then there's a number of districts that can't raise.
Yeah, and if you're in Othello or
But
if you're in
temporarily, you
small.
think they would fix it till they fund McCleary? And then there'd be a bridge and it wouldn't stop.
And there's been 3 different bills dropped this legislative
And they
session
didn't go through.
that
No,
maybe
they-
aren't getting enough traction
No,
anymore.
they're, Senator Litton's, I think, or Representative Litton's, I think.
There's
made it.
still a lot.
Yeah.
And McCullough
But-
dropped one.
But
Um,
if anything happens, it will happen in the 11th hour of the legislative session. It will be the very, very end, it'll be packaged with some kind of go-home deal in the end of the legislative session.
So next year, provided they don't make their, they don't pull their heads out of their, yeah. That's not very good. Sense of humor, that's what you said. We'll start getting on this sooner in the process,
Well,
looking at the various ways that we have to,
I would,
anticipating it.
I would say if they don't deal with this in the current legislative session, there will be a growing movement across the state that will involve WASA, WASDA, WASBO,
Union.
to definitely to pull the legislature back into a special session sometime to address this issue and not wait for the legislative session. That's what we've
Because
been trying to.
every school district will go
Yeah,
through
well,
this.
that's what we're trying to communicate to because legislators say, okay, well, next year we have a long session, we're gonna fix the problem, and our legislative session's supposed to end by the end of April, so that's plenty of time for a solution to be in place for 2017-18. You haven't even started that year yet. But the problem is that how we develop our budgets, and particularly the timelines by which we have to let staff know if they're gonna be ripped,
Yeah.
we have no choice but to move forward with that, because if they don't fix it, and we haven't taken appropriate steps, we could end up with a budget that's, millions of dollars out of balance.
But
And-
we have the year of we could adjust the board policy, I'm not saying we would, I'm asking. We could adjust the board policy for that year, that we wouldn't need to have that 3% rainy day fund essentially. Because I saw you drew that down.
You certainly can,
Like if we were trying to anticipate
Yeah.
and they don't come out with their thing and we're going, we still need to plan.
Yeah.
I'm not saying
That's
there's
the,
not a whole,
that's the brinksmanship.
I'm just saying there's
Yeah.
other ways to,
We
Yeah.
we will be
Yeah.
addressing this,
Yeah.
but right now the
Yeah.
message is
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
consistent to the legislature.
We are
I'm just saying we
united.
have dollars.
We're united across
Right
the
now.
state.
And since this is the kind of the 3-year projection type thing, even if there is a grand bargain and billions dollar more go from the state into education, this is a question. That doesn't, will we necessarily get more money than what we're currently getting in total? Because they could do what people call the levy swap. They could
Yeah.
take all of our levy money away and give us approximately the same amount or even less. So it is even if the state puts in billions into education, North Shore's revenue, total revenue from state and local sources is not guaranteed to be more or even the same.
I think you're right on, and I think that's a political question, because I think
Right.
there are some who feel like McCleary has essentially been completed, with the exception of we need to shift the balance of state versus local funding.
that would be
In
any help,
in
right?
kind of a revenue neutral
Right.
sort of way.
And
And then there are others who say, even if you address the levy issue, the whole system is somewhere between $2.5 to $4 billion underfunded in total. And so, where we're gonna land in the middle of that, who knows?
So, but from a 3-year projection, we have no idea really how much our total state and local, that combined number is, we really can't plan with certainty on that.
Correct.
That's
And we need to be very mindful of what the underlying policy would be that will drive dollars to the district.
right.
Because depending on what kind of policy choices they make, we're funding a lot of our critical business right now with our local levy dollars.
Right.
If the money they give us doesn't allow us to unwind those local levy obligations, and yet they decrease our local levy, even if they give us more money, we could still be in a bad way. So we've got to pay attention not only to the dollars, but to the policy as well.
Right.
Alrighty, I am almost done.
So,
The reason I like this slide is that Chris prepared so nicely is if you look back at.
Good job. I like it too, Chris.
Wow,
Yeah. that's
If
really
you
the
look
primary
at this particular display,
That's what's different.
it looks like our revenues for taxes are going down 2.8. They're actually going down 3.8 because we're not gaining the one up that we're expecting
All right.
in the prior slide. Then, not only that, but it's cumulative.
Right.
So you only saw the portion reduction.
That's a great slide.
Thanks for making it look easier.
Yeah, so unfortunately, that model of display on the Excel spreadsheet doesn't tell quite the right picture. So we wanted to show that what we think we believe we could collect in future years is, 3.8, and then it accumulates over time, that the disparity gets larger. So just over 2 years, we would expect a decrease of 10.5 million, and then it would keep compounding.
And the same thing happens with any new expenditures that you're adding in, it's cumulative, so if you're adding in, like, see, an extra 1% for CBAs, that's, you're gonna be
Yeah,
getting
every
more.
year.
Can I make a political announcement real quick?
Yeah, just speaking of crazy.
Trump won and Cindy.
Yeah, we looked it up.
Where did you guys see?
We
We were looking at it during the board meeting.
We were a little lost halfway.
Well, for those of you that didn't know, it's Trump.
And Sanders?
So,
Yeah,
Sid,
Sorry.
I just want to thank Lydia and
Yeah,
Chris.
thank
and,
you.
I hope for the board, this has been at least a good start. Certainly not, as I said at the beginning, certainly not the end, but at least a good start. We'll be coming back on the 23rd with an executive session. Just a reminder, we're going to try and start at 5 o'clock rather than the normal 5:30, just so that we can have a little bit more time, make sure we have enough time prior to the 7 p.m. board meeting on the 23rd. David will be joining us for the first part by conference call on the 23rd.
We were just testing our.
That's executive session, is what you're doing.
Correct.
Okay, I get it, yeah.
So, and help me out here, guys, so a regular I'm just working on the timing, right, with bargaining and with the Southern Task Force and all this. So if they're going to do anything about the levy cliff, we'll know end of April?
No, we'll know mid-March, because this is a
March
short
10th.
60-day session.
Okay.
And everybody wants to finish the session on time and get out of town and not have multiple extended sessions as they've had in recent years, because it's an election year. And nobody can raise money or run for re-election while they are in session.
Okay.
So we should know
We'll know
by
March.
mid-March where we stand with the levy issue.
I'll double check.
And like I say, if they don't do anything with it, I think there will be lots of pressure then put to pull them back at some point in time to address it before next legislative session, because that's just too late for districts, it doesn't work.
But, I mean, we haven't discussed this still, but it's highly possible if they don't make a decision by March 10th, we'll have to continue down the road of presuming if the cliff is going to happen. Depending on what, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
well-
trying to,
I think uncertainty will happen.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
You did really well.
Yeah.
You did really well.
That's good. Like,
That's it. Oh, no, we still.
I think that's all we've
That's
got.
it.
Are we?
Any questions on board members? Like, do we have another hour? Am I done?
You're good.
We are officially adjourned.